On this edition of Everything is Better in the Past, it's TV show openings. With the release of the Netflix adaptation of One Piece, this show had a much better reception after some very high-profile anime bombs, ranging from Cowboy Bebop to Death Note. But if there was one place where Netflix did drop the ball, it would have to be the show's opening titles, if you can even call it that. There are no sea monsters or sword fights, as the Netflix adaptation simply has a logo splash screen. Each opening title does feature a different pirate or character from every episode, but if you are introducing One Piece to a brand new audience, a bit more effort could have been made. It's such a flaccid opening when you put it next to the anime. Even Cowboy Bebop, for all its faults, recreated the opening sequence with a live action version. Whether it's great visuals, a creative premise, and especially if it's a decent soundtrack, a good opening can take on a life of its own, and in some cases outlive the TV show itself, long after it's been cancelled or come to an end. There's a very good reason HBO used the theme music from Game of Thrones in the prequel series House of the Dragon. There's a hell of a lot of noise out there, with so many new shows airing across the infinite number of streaming services. Subtitle sequences feel phoned in or like an afterthought, and most openings simply aren't memorable. I'm a fan of The Walking Dead opening, and over the years this has managed to take on a life of its own. The look and feel of The Walking Dead became influential across the zombie genre, but this opening does feel kind of generic, and a little bit too obvious for a show about zombies. Although, I do appreciate that over the years the titles would degrade, as the zombies themselves are decomposing, similar to how a body would in real life. Despite the high production values of The Walking Dead, this feels like an opening that was made on a budget, and kind of looks like a glorified slideshow. If I had to blame one show for popularising this type of opening, it would be Making a Murderer. It does bear a striking resemblance to The Walking Dead opening too, and like The Walking Dead, the music is excellent and does most of the heavy lifting. For this docu-series it does feel appropriate. Netflix struck gold with Making a Murderer, so they took the success of the show and ran with it. Over the next few years we saw dozens of true crime docu-series and full-length documentaries following similar branding, and some of these feel interchangeable with one another. The Tiger King introduction felt especially lazy. It's simply a bunch of interviews, clips and news reports stitched together. No doubt, a series like this cost a pretty penny to make, but with all the mental stuff that happens in this show, you would think that something more fitting could have been made, or the branding could have leaned into the absurdity a bit more, or maybe use some of the music that's in the show.
Tell them that the tiger needs a little bit of love.
It also drags on for a full 2 minutes. This is where that skip intro button comes in very handy. If there's one TV show that deserves a better opening, it's Daredevil. The opening gradually reveals a bunch of objects, landmarks and buildings as they're slowly covered in blood, followed by a statue of Daredevil himself, paired with an incredibly unmemorable soundtrack. It looks dark and grimy, and hints to the themes of the show of justice and Christianity, and this opening does have its fans, but this all feels like an afterthought. Other Marvel Netflix shows would also get a similar treatment. Luke Cage's opening had a similar look and feel to Making a Murderer, but now with a blaxploitation soundtrack and a yellow filter. By the fourth show in the series, Iron Fist, I'm guessing the animators either didn't get the time or budget they needed, because this opening is as phoned in as they come. Dull visuals performed by a faceless martial artist to a boring soundtrack. I don't mean to pick on Netflix here, but their openings do follow a similar trend. For every good opening they have, like Stranger Things, there are plenty of House of Cards, Narcos and The Spy. These are all very well made, and the animators did a great job, but you probably won't remember it as soon as you finish watching each show. One year before Daredevil aired, we have Black Sails. This show serves as a prequel to the book Treasure Island, and was made in a time after Game of Thrones aired, when everything had to be dark and mature. By no means the most memorable introduction, but the 3D modelling here is truly excellent. This is the opening that Daredevil was trying to be. Plus, the music is incredible. As it was made using the most pirate-sounding instrument there is, fittingly called the hurdy-gurdy. But a disappointing opening for me was Rings of Power, a classic fantasy world reduced to a boring series made by showrunners who lacked experience and would rather change the source material than embrace it. The opening depicts gold, sand and pebbles moving in abstract patterns, with dark black sand being introduced. There's not all that much to say about it honestly, but the biggest disappointment here is the music. This was made by Howard Shore himself, who also composed the soundtrack for a good adaptation of Tolkien's work. The music here is just so bland. It doesn't provide any of the memorable hooks like from the movie soundtrack. The making of this opening is actually better than the opening itself. For a show that cost $1 billion, I was at least expecting something more interesting. The TV adaptation of The Last of Us is a great show, but for me this title sequence was a bit disappointing. There was such a wonderful minimalist approach to the graphic design in the video game. The main menu featured an open window in a derelict house with a knife propped in the corner, and I loved the loading screen. It's a plain background with solemn atmospheric music as the spores slowly move across the screen. The TV show opening throws any subtlety out the window. It's this sprawling 3D animation as the fungus takes over the logo. There's so much colour here, it feels like it's based off a different video game. The original release of the game featured an introduction that was similar in concept, but with a more somber tone and in black and white. The best thing about The Last of Us is not the virus or the zombies, it's the characters, it's Joel and Ellie. I have nothing against a good 3D or animated intro, but why not make an opening that was unique to what made Last of Us so good? And having Joel and Ellie appear in the fungus doesn't count. Speaking of being unique, there are several openings for shows that immediately come to mind, so the following are the ones that either have good visuals, a good concept, or a great theme song. This is likely down to either my bias or nostalgia, and I haven't seen every show on the planet, so unfortunately, I can't talk about every single TV show. Sorry. Even after more than 20 years, and being brought back for, I don't know, the 15th time, Futurama has been revived, with the original opening sequence also being brought back. The visuals here are largely the same, with a few updates from more recent seasons, such as adding in new buildings and swapping out characters with some more familiar faces. With a theme song so good, this is one opening you don't skip. The Simpsons, for all its many faults as a TV show, has retained its classic theme song and opening titles, with the visuals being added to and modernised over time. With Futurama and The Simpsons having these great openings, I was so disappointed with the opening to Disenchantment. It feels like an opening to a Netflix show, and that's because it is. I've always had a soft spot for the South Park introduction, especially the one with the fast-paced banjo. Every few years this opening will receive an update, with the most recent opening going fully 3D. With so many adult animated cartoons around these days, I find very few have memorable openings. F is for Family is one of the few good ones, showing that the sky's the limit when you leave college, but an unexpected pregnancy and being drafted brings the main character back down to earth. Honestly, it looks like they blew the entire animation budget on this opening alone. For a show like Rick and Morty, the visuals are great and very fitting for the show. The music on the other hand is fine. This was left over from one of Justin Roiland's previous shows called Dogworld, so with Roiland now firmly out of the picture, I would like to see something more memorable introduced. While most modern show openings leave very little impression on me, this is one, like Futurama, I don't skip. A blend of lovely visuals and a perfect theme song that fits the mystery comedy series so well. The visuals depict a fly-through of the apartment building where the show is based, with all the characters being hand-drawn. Apparently the composer of Serial's theme song accused the show's composer of plagiarism. It's probably not a coincidence, since this show includes a satire of Serial, and is about three friends starting their own true crime podcast. I would argue this is better than Serial's theme song anyway. There are far too many excellent British police and detective dramas, and we do love detective shows, with pretty boring opening titles. Even shows I love like Broadchurch don't even have opening titles. It's just a splash screen with a logo in a sans serif font. Shows like Luther and Sherlock at least put some effort into their introductions, though they don't feel very unique. Not necessarily an opening sequence, but what works so well for Peaky Blinders is the song choice and the visuals that go with it, as the visuals change every single episode, and I guess technically there isn't an opening title sequence. Instead of relying on a 3D render, I appreciate that they shot footage just for each opening. It really helps to set the scene and pull you into the world of the early 20th century. Featuring the Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds song Red Right Hand, Peaky Blinders has given this song a new lease on life in the UK, with most openings ending on a similar moment in the song. Another show opening that changes every episode is Atlanta. Each one is very short, with the song changing and featuring a different rapper each time too. The name of the show is displayed somewhere in the scene or background. Some of these are obvious, while others you may need to look for. This one is a personal favourite of mine. A bizarre dark show like this needs a fitting introduction, and they really nailed the opening titles for Dexter. The show follows a Miami cop working in a forensic lab by day, but at night he goes on the hunt for his next victim, as Dexter is actually a serial killer. Despite simply showing Dexter's morning routine, the visuals depict or allude to violence and death, like the tightening of a shoelace, the splatter of ketchup, and chopping up meat for breakfast. The music is also very fitting, as it feels in line with the show's oddly dark sense of humour. It's so unique sounding you won't hear a theme like this on any other show. I mentioned Luther and Sherlock earlier, and the reason I don't love these opening titles is because they're rampant with cliches, being detective shows set in London that feature drops of blood, fingerprints and famous landmarks. For Dexter, technically this is a police show, but this is an opening that feels unique to this series. When I thought of making this video, the openings for Dexter and Futurama were the two good openings that immediately sprung to mind. HBO very rarely miss when it comes to their opening titles. For every so-so opening like Westworld, which is very pretty but very boring, you've got all the usual suspects like Game of Thrones and The Sopranos, which has even become something of a tourist attraction, as fans are known to drive this route while visiting New Jersey. But one of their best would have to be Band of Brothers. It does have a whiff of The Walking Dead about it, mostly serving as a compilation of clips from the series, but it's the excellent soundtrack here that never gets old, and that's considering this opening is from 2001. I wouldn't say Breaking Bad has the best opening. The show is known more for its incredible storytelling and performances. It was short and sweet, and has become memorable thanks to that music. The prequel spin-off series Better Call Saul is also quite simple, but evolves over the course of the show. Each episode has a different introduction, with references from Breaking Bad that fans will likely recognise. It has that wonderful 1990s, early 2000s look with the blocky pixelated typography and VHS effect. For each season, the openings also get gradually more distorted, with most of the intros appearing in black and white by the final season. WandaVision features homages to a number of past TV shows, with each episode taking influence from a comedy series from different decades. I wish the rest of Marvel's TV show openings were given this much attention, but sadly the rest fall in line with other lazy openings I mentioned earlier. The visuals for Secret Invasion were at least interesting, but this is let down by the stock cinematic soundtrack. WandaVision was the first Marvel series on Disney+, so it feels like there was a lot more care and attention put into this show. I was about to end this video praising Disney and Marvel, but the best opening has to go to